Senator, I'm Darren Bushman from Paiute County up in Marysville, so thank you for coming to our neighborhood. I have a question for you, and it refers to a little bit of what you were talking about earlier. 2/3 of the state of Utah being owned by the federal government. What is your opinion on House Bill 148, Senator Ivory's House bill that requests the government to extinguish title to all lands in the state of Utah other than state parks and that sort of thing?
I like it. I think it starts a discussion that's long overdue, and a discussion that, if followed through to its logical conclusion, or even anything close to its logical conclusion, would benefit all of Utahns, all 3 million of us. You know, when Utah became a state, actually 2 years before it became a state, Congress passed the Statehood Enabling Act for Utah in 1894, 2 years prior to our statehood. Section 9 of the Statehood Enabling Act contained language that, at least implicitly, if not explicitly, promised that they would liquidate those lands at some point after statehood. 5% of the public lands within the state's boundaries, comma, which shall be sold subsequent to statehood, comma, shall be placed in a trust fund for the benefit of Utah's public school system, or words to that effect. Well, 116 years went by and they never sold it. There are reasons for that. I don't know all the reasons why they didn't do it, but it didn't happen. But that doesn't mean that it shouldn't happen, or that the process shouldn't at least start to happen, at least with respect to some of the land today. The fact that the federal government owns all that land is causing real people a lot of problems, really good people a lot of problems, and it shouldn't be that way. I mean, look, if any one of us owned that much land, it would be troubling. I mean, you know, if my friend Boyd, who spoke to you a few minutes ago, if he owned, say, 5% of the land in the state of Utah, people would get nervous. It would give him a lot of economic power over our state's economy. It'd get more nervous if he owned 10 or 15 or 20%. Even though Boyd's a good guy, he really is. It'd get more nervous still if he owned half the land in the state of Utah. And they'd get really, really nervous if he owned 2/3 of the land in the state of Utah. He could become kind of a tyrant of sorts in locking people out of access to this or that property. They'd get even more nervous if all of a sudden Boyd said, not only am I going to own 2/3 of the land in the state of Utah, but I hereby declare myself exempt from all forms of taxation on that land. That would be really troubling, because all of a sudden the state's funding mechanism, especially the funding mechanism at the county level, the local level, wouldn't be able to get that revenue stream. And this would result in decreased economic development, especially if Boyd thereafter said, I'm also going to be really, really restrictive. If anyone wants to drill for oil or natural gas on my land, or mine it for minerals that would be valuable, for coal or something else, I will decide where people are going to do this, and a lot of the time I'm just not going to grant any permits. People would be really upset. Well, why is it different when the government is, the owner is a government instead of an individual? I don't think it should be. And you know, I'll tell you another thing. There's a reason why Utah has for some time been dead last in terms of per student school funding. 51st in the nation, after every other state and the District of Columbia. Some of the elites back east are fond of saying snarky things like, well, it's because you have too many kids. I find that offensive and insulting, and it's a lie. That's not the reason why. It's because we can't tax most of our land. It's wrong, and we need to solve the problem. So HB 148 starts a very necessary discussion at a state level, and I've been talking to Ken Ivory about these ideas for a couple years, since before either of us were elected. I think another discussion that we need to be having, as that's going on in the state, is in Congress. I'm having a discussion with my colleagues about the PILT program, payment in lieu of taxes. It's what the federal government gives to the states, recognizing that, you know, there is this problem. Only they underfund PILT. The states get a tiny, tiny fraction of what they would get if they could actually tax those lands. I'd like to see, at a minimum, the federal government compensating the local taxing authorities in a way that they'd be paying at least property tax at their lowest property tax rate in that county. That'd make a huge difference. That by itself would help us have more money to fund our schools. And it would also incentivize the federal land managers to allow more economic activity on their lands so that they could generate more revenue, so that they could pay us the PILT funds. In addition, it would incentivize federal land managers to look for parcels of land that they might not need, that might be appropriate for development, that perhaps they should sell. So we can get there. It's going to take some time, but we cannot be content with letting someone else rule our land.